misunderstood passage. Our relationship with the government is what we'll be focusing on, as well as some other things. When we finish the book of Romans, we're going to shift to, I just realized this today, that there's a book of the Bible that I had never taught through. Now, I've preached sermons from it, but I've never, ever taught through it. And it's not Leviticus. Okay? Ezekiel. The Valley of Dry Bones, Gog and Magog War, the New Heart, all of that, yes. But overall, no, I haven't. So when we finish Romans, and buckle your seatbelts, we're going to climb into Ezekiel. Now, I will say a few things. I'll give you a much better introduction to Ezekiel later. But Ezekiel is a wild book, and we'll see why it's so wild when we get there. Okay, Romans chapter 13. Let me back up to Romans 12. Not very far, just one verse, and then we'll get into it. And the reason sometimes I feel the need to do this is we often have an approach to Scripture reading that we look at chapters as if they are an independent unit. Sometimes we do verses that way. That's how come so many people misunderstand what the Bible actually says, is because they isolate verses away from its context. But when Paul wrote the letter to the Romans, there were no verses, there were no chapter divisions. Those were added much, much, much later in order to aid in our being able to navigate through the Bible. And I appreciate that. But those that did that didn't always kind of get it exactly right. At least I would suspect they didn't divide the way they should have. So with that said, go back to one verse prior to verse 1 of chapter 13 may be helpful. And it is this: do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Then he moves right in. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Okay, he's going to get heavy here. And you're going to understand the rub that's going to take place in just a few moments about what Paul is saying and what the balance of Scripture also informs us about this particular thing. There are primarily three institutions that God has ordained. Okay? One, what is the first institution that God ordained? Marriage. We find that clearly demonstrated in the first chapters of Genesis. Clearly, that's what that we get there. What is another institution? And I use that in kind of broad terms. What's another institution that God has ordained?
Family.
Well, marriage and family are kind of synonymous together because one leads to the other. And one is the response to the other.
Church.
The church, I would suggest, is the third one. But government is definitely instituted by God. Here's where the rub begins. What if you have a less than beneficial government? Or an unjust government? Now we'll deal with that in just a few moments, but I want you to be reminded when Paul wrote the letter to the Romans, there was a government. The government was the Roman government. Now there are certain things that we learned and even have adapted from the Roman system of government. But the Roman government was not a righteous government. As a matter of fact, the emperor had a lot of power, a lot of authority. And even so, as time went on, even after the period that Paul lived, there became the institution, as it were, of the worship of the emperor, seeing the emperor in as a deity of sorts. And so that was coming later. But even in Paul's day, there was a particular Nero. Caesar. I let the cat out of the bag when I said that. No, there was a Caesar. His name was Nero, and Nero was a nut. I mean, certifiably insane. Because many of the things that he did were just nuts. We look at it today and consider it that way. That's the head of the government, as Paul's writing, that is in that period of time. He is the Caesar that Paul would eventually appeal to, his case to, and he would stand before Caesar in Caesar's court, because Paul had a privilege and honor that most of the people in the Roman Empire did not have. He was a Roman citizen, a naturally born Roman citizen. Not one that bought citizenship, but one that actually was born possessing it. And we don't know exactly why, but somehow along the way, Paul's father was a Roman citizen. Maybe he did something heroic and citizenship was bestowed upon him. Anyway, Paul had it. And later, Paul's traveling companion, not Barnabas, but Silas, was also a Roman citizen, which meant that Paul would enjoy certain kind of privileges that others would not. He would not, if he was, and he eventually was beheaded, but he would never have been crucified, because a Roman citizen would never be executed with that lack of dignity. That's why he was beheaded. It was thought to be the most merciful and quickest death. And so that's the context. So Paul knows of what he speaks here. All right. God, as these Romans are hearing this letter read to them, they're thinking Nero. Where did Nero live? Rome. Where do these people live? Rome. So they're keenly aware of the workings of the Roman Senate and also the emperor himself. Verse 2. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. Okay. Now I want to hang on before we get to verse 4. So Paul is building a very positive case. And basically what he's saying in this sense is, Christians, followers of Christ, should be the best citizens that a government serves. And they should be. We should be and we'll talk about our form of government loosely in just a few moments. So Paul is setting out a very positive case of how we should interact with our government. We should not be doing evil. We should be doing what is good. We should be honoring those that are in governmental positions, because we understand that God is the one who ordained, determined that government exists. And quite frankly, we can't live without some form of government. We can't. People have to be, I don't want to use the word controlled, that's not what I actually mean. But people, in order for a culture to survive, there has to be order. And the government is to bring order. and different levels of government and the authority that is vested in different parts of government support that. I mean, really, if there were no police or no highway patrolmen, can you imagine what 57 would be like? Kind of like it is, but far worse. It'd be far worse, would it not? I mean, there would be, you know, when you're driving down toward Mount Vernon, you get in there where all the construction is, and there in the center of the road there is a highway patrol vehicle. You slow down. Your conscience gets you right that moment, and you look at the first thing you do. You take your foot off the gas. You look at your speedometer to see what you're doing, so you know whether you need to go ahead and pull over or just. I had in Southeast Arkansas, one of our deacons down there, great guy, but he was driving back from Little Rock, I think. He's driving Little Rock back down to where we live in the southeast corner there of the state of Arkansas. And as he was driving along there, a highway patrolman pulled him over. And his name was Buck Cook, great guy. So the highway patrolman comes up and he asks, for the registration, asks for his driver's license, that kind of thing. And Buck, said to him, "Why did you pull me over? Did you not see all those people passing me?" And undoubtedly they were. And the highway patrolman's response to Buck was, "I can't catch them all. But I did catch you." Okay? So, you see what I mean. There has to be order. There has to be order. And when there's disorder, you have Chicago. I'm serious. Now I'm not making jokes. I'm serious. Or Portland. St. Louis, yeah. You see what I mean? When there's disorder, what kind of things take place? So God has instituted government for our good, for our benefit. And as citizens, we should respect those in governmental positions, to be sure. But also we should be, quote, law-abiding citizens, end quote. However, and we're going to get to more of this in just a moment, are we always to obey the government? Okay. Let's think through this. Now, say that you feel that you should have the freedom to drive 70 through town. Well, you may feel that way, but you're going to have to submit to the governmental authorities here for doing such a thing. When I talk about law-abiding, I mean abide by the laws. But is there a time when you should not or ought not to comply?
Because they go against God's law.
Okay. Now, give me some biblical examples that would support the contention that when the government, let me give you, I'll back up. In some portions of Germany and during the Holocaust, there were some Christians that refused to hide Jews because they were submitting to the authority of their government. And they used this passage to support their lack of concern for what was happening to the Jewish population. So we need to be aware. So they used this passage to comply. For a few years, only in latter years did he change this. Even someone like John MacArthur viewed the idea that the church and state, what we know, we're just two totally separate entities. That's true. That is true. But there were certain kind of things that even MacArthur was hesitant to become involved in because he saw that as a blending of the two, and he just did not want to do that. Now, in later years, his practice and beliefs obviously shifted because during the COVID lockdowns in California, they opened the church back up. Even though they were receiving fines and threats from Gavin Newsom and the California government there in doing that. And in some senses, I don't think I've ever said anything to this to very many people, but while we were shut down because of COVID, I don't know if you remember that we shut down until it's sometime in I can tell you the date. It was in February that we were told to shut for 2 weeks, and that kept extending. And then when Easter rolled around, it was an early Easter because it's still kind of cold outside. We had a parking lot. We had our Easter service in the parking lot. I called the police department and told them what we was going to do. I wasn't calling to ask permission. I was calling them to tell them what we were going to do, because some municipalities actually would send in officers and take license plates numbers and trying to find people for coming to church, sitting in their own car in a parking lot. I don't know. So the dispatcher who I was talking to, he said, well, I wouldn't recommend it. I said, okay. We went ahead and did it. We did it for a couple more weeks, then we came back into the church. One of the reasons why we began shifting pretty quickly in that respect, Blaine Wilhauer told us to do it. He said that is to close down a church and leaving liquor stores and strip bars open is unconstitutional. So, and of course, the state of Illinois just left us alone. And we weren't the only ones. There's a lot of churches began doing that. But so back up to my earlier question. Can you give me biblical examples that would support the contention and the practice that when the government requires followers of Christ to do something or not do something that is biblical and mandated for us, that we should not comply?
Like when they wanted Daniel to bow to the
Okay.
statue.
Daniel chapter 3, which consisted of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did not bow. Daniel chapter 6, even though Daniel was and everyone else was forbidden to pray, he still prayed. Both of those were examples, but they're not the only ones.
The disciples, when they were hauled in the court for preaching, and then they were told they were going to let them go, but they told them to not preach anymore. They went right back out and preached.
Well, they even said something. You tell us it's better to obey God than men. That's good. There's 3 examples. I've got one more in mind.
Abortion?
Huh?
Abortion?
No, not necessarily. Well, yeah, that would be. I'm looking for biblical examples, but you're right. What about the midwives in Exodus? They disobeyed a direct command from Pharaoh, the king, that they would not kill baby boys. Okay. You see there is what's called a biblical rationale. So if the government would issue a law, pass a law that would cause us to violate what God has said, we just have the responsibility to not comply. Period. Now that it gets kind of technical too, because with big broad brushes we can say sure there are certain kind of things that the government tells us to do, and it violates God's law or God's commands or God's word. Yes, we don't do it, or we just don't comply. But then those are the general speaking. But there can be some minute details that also could impact that, and it gets to more of the level of conscience of what is, as you feel, it may not be in the big scheme right or wrong, but it could be a violation of your conscience. And I'm not looking for a debate here, but the COVID shot is a case in point there, because there were people that lost jobs, military people that were discharged because they refused to take the COVID shot. The problem with the COVID shot was it's not a vaccine. So you need to understand that. Now, it was marketed as a vaccine, but it was not. It was a totally different approach. And then there was the pressure that was applied about certain kind of treatment options. Ivermectin. You couldn't say, if you said, honestly, if I would have said that word, Facebook would have shut us off. I'm serious. There's certain kinds of words that the algorithm would pick up and it would stop us. And it did. One time, I said the word, believe it or not, this is opposite back, I said the word immigration. Some folks told me that Facebook went white for several seconds. And then it came back on. When it realized that I wasn't continuing talking about that, I just mentioned it. Okay. So there are those kind of things. And there can be things that Christians are divided on. So what do you do in those kind of circumstances? Well, you pray, you seek God, you seek the Scripture, and you do what your conscience demands. And it may differ from person to person. Not in a big sense of the great big right and wrong, but in the individual experience of life and following Christ, there are those things that can be somewhat ambiguous, meaning not real clear, but we got to deal with those things too. There's a lot of those things. Much of it's not that big a deal. I said it the wrong way. Most of them are large enough and clear enough, there is no ambiguity. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this kind of stuff out. You mentioned the issue of abortion. It's not a hard one to figure out. It's not a hard one to figure out at all. What are we talking about? What happens is we don't frame it with the right framework. We start using words like pro-choice or anti-choice, or those kind of things. And what we're doing though is we're not really dealing with what is it. What are we talking about?
Murder.
I mean, really, what are we talking about? That's where you need to ask that kind of question when we talk about certain kind of things. Say, for example, I could pick all kinds of moral issues where the government has been using pressure on people to comply with their stated desire, and that goes to the transgender, the LGBT, TAI plus stuff, where we really get into la la land and deal with some things that just simply are not even attached to reality. Most people can wake up to that, but they fear the pressure that can be mounted upon them. There are certain kind of things that you don't want to say because of the repercussions, the blowback that you might receive because of it. It depends on I can say things to you that in some work environments you cannot say to others. Because you'll get in trouble. You may get fired if you express ideas that simply, or beliefs, or that do not comply with what others may be pressuring. Things have changed, which is good. There's a measure of sanity coming back to our nation, but it's slow. It's slow. Okay, enough of that. So we got it settled, right? Generally speaking, we should be law-abiding Christians, citizens. However, there are occasions when we should not comply with the government. Right? Okay, we got that settled. Most of those issues are pretty clear. But some of those issues can be a little bit nuanced, which may reside in a person's conscience. So, some people felt, back to my earlier example, some people felt that it was better to take the injection for COVID, hoping that it would work, and others refrained from that. And And you have to kind of, you have to weigh those things and look at those things. What exactly is your body? Does someone else have the right to tell you what you should put into it? Just thoughts like that. And that's where it's an individual kind of nuanced kind of thing. Okay, let's go on and see what he's got to say in verse 4. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Now, there is an issue that's raised here that, again, will cause a lot of divide among a lot of different Christian people. Committed followers of Christ, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but let me back up for a moment. The word for he is God's servant. And an interesting word. In the New Testament, there are two words, at least two, and variations of these two, that are used to talk about, and sometimes translated, servant. The first one is doulos. A doulos is a slave. The New American Standard usually renders that as bondservant. Or literally, it means slave. And the Roman Empire, almost 2/3 of the people living there were in one form or another in slavery. They were slaves. There wasn't a racial component. It was if you were conquered, you were a slave. You could be sold as a slave. A lot of professions that we hold in very high regard today, in those days, were usually those positions were held by slaves. Teachers were most often slaves. Doctors most often were slaves. As a matter of fact, an argument can be made that Luke was a slave who wrote the Gospel of Luke. So that was the kind of thing that they would. You could sell yourself into slavery. Say you overspent, you're in debt. You could actually attach yourself to someone for a period of time. I will serve you if you pay my debt. And that was go on. That's where the idea of bondservant. There's another word for servant, diakonos. You may hear a word, something similar out of that. Diakonos. Deacon is it. That's right. That's what the word means. Deacon. It means under rower. It's a servant. Not a slave per se, though sometimes it could be interchangeably used as slave. But it was someone that serves in some capacity or other. And that's where deacons were in the church to serve, to be spiritual servants of the church. That's their main job. It's not to rule the church, but it is to serve the church. That's what the meaning of the word means. Okay, so he goes on, for he does not bear the sword in vain. That's capital punishment. That's capital punishment. There's a lot of issues tied into the issue of capital punishment. When is it appropriate? Is it ever appropriate? Should it be administered or should it not be administered? And under what circumstances should it be administered? Good questions. That's where Christians come down on different perspectives on it. Now, just speaking generally before we get to the specifics, is capital punishment biblically defensible? I got a few hands going up, and some kind of not sure whether to say yay or nay. Well, actually, it is. It is. We find it in the Old Testament, chapter 9 of Genesis, that he who sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. There were also here, this definitely means capital punishment. All right. So we have those kind of that statement is pretty easily defended, both Old and New Testament. Now, 5. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes. For authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. It's a very unique phrase. Remember, Nero, the Roman government, is what he's living under. And he simply says, notice that the authorities are ministers of God, attending this very thing. He goes on and says, pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes is owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. That's how you and I are to live. Are there exceptions? We've already talked about them. Yes, there are. And at times it may take a measure of courage to stand against and say, I will not comply. I will not do this. I will not follow this directive. I just won't do that. But there can conceivably be times when that is necessary, and it's also God honoring. Back to what Peter told the Sanhedrin. You decide. Is it better to obey man than God? Well, the obvious answer is God, right? And that's why, so Peter and John, when they were released, they did not stop preaching in His name. Okay. Now the direction changes. He says in verse 8, owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Now, what law?
Love your neighbor and yourself.
Okay, we're going to get to that. That's going to be the summary of the law. You're right about that. What law? Is it the ceremonial law? Making sure that we go to Yom Kippur, the day of the Pentecost, or have those kind of feasts, the feast of booze and that kind of. Is that what we're to do? That law? Or is it the dietary code? Don't eat shrimp, don't eat catfish. The kosher laws, the dietary code. It's none of those. It's the 10 Commandments. That's what he's talking about. He's even going to. The reason I can say that with confidence is he's going to quote some of them. Okay, and he says now the claim is that loving another will fulfill the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any of the other commandments are all summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love, verse 10, does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Now, if you truly love your neighbor, you will not steal from your neighbor. Right? As a matter of fact, if you really love your neighbor, you can't steal from them. If you really love your neighbor, are you going to commit adultery? No, you're not. You won't. You will absolutely refuse. Even if the opportunity presents itself, you will not do it, because if you love your neighbor, you will not do that. You will not. You cannot. You certainly will do any. You won't. You need to. People need to see. You may remember Dr. Laura Schlesinger. One radical Jew. Anyway, I was listening to her on the radio when she was on the radio. I'll tell you. You ever know when you were at a certain place, you can remember where you were when you heard it? I was at this stoplight right down here by a Motor Mart. I heard it. There was a woman that called in talking to Dr. Laura, and she admitted that she was involved with a married man. And she said, and this is what she was saying. Listen, we're both consenting adults. It's amazing how we can rationalize our sin. We're both consenting adults. We're not hurting anybody. And so I don't see any reason. I'm just calling you to see if, what you think about this kind of relationship. And Dr. Laura was trying to talk to her, and she was, well, this woman wasn't getting it. You could tell that she was not putting the pieces together. And then Dr. Laura changed the picture. Wait a minute. Have you considered the man's wife? Well, no, that's his issue with his wife. Blah blah blah. And Dr. Laura said this, and this is why I remember where I was when I heard it, because I thought, man, that's good. She said, well, to this woman, she said, consider him his wife. Consider him her ox. In other words, he is her property. You have no right to her property. And that light came on in that gal's head. You see, you need to look at marriage that way. I'm serious. You need to look at marriage that way. Not this flippant way that we see so much in our culture. But you need to understand that one becomes, when a couple is married, they become property. Not in the sense of a car or a house or anything like that, but that's what the marriage bond is designed to be, is that property. All kinds of things happen. We live in a fallen world with all kinds of, I know. I'm just saying, as Christian people, we need to understand it that way. That's what we're talking about. So if you love your neighbor as yourself, you won't do that. As a matter of fact, if you love your neighbor as yourself, they should be able to come and hand you the keys to their house, hand you their checkbook, hand you their credit cards, and they should be absolutely relaxed and secure that they know that you can be trusted totally. Totally. They can trust you with their kids. Because if you love your neighbor as yourself, you will do that. You see how that works? Do we as Christians always do that? No, we don't. Because, you see, we don't think of it necessarily that way. We can I use the word rationalize. We can rationalize our sin and convince us that it's not bad. Convince ourselves it's not bad. We can make all kinds of excuses. We can do this. We're good at it. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, you do. You know what I'm talking about. You may not want to agree, but nod your head, but you know what I'm talking about, because we can do that. And I say we because I know that I can too. Can I tell you about my Aunt Claudie? Well, don't turn it off again? No. My Aunt Claudie was a wonderful person. She was, in many respects. My dad, when he was in the army and in Korea, he would send his money, the money that he was being paid. He sent it to Aunt Claudie, because he knew he could trust her. That's the person among all the relatives he knew he could trust for sure by sending the money back to her. So she was that way. She could be trusted. She also was a person that would rationalize the behavior of her children. One of her children was the same age as my dad, and they grew up together. They were closer. He was closer to him, his cousin, than he was his own brothers, because that came along later. And long story there, but Stanley was given to drink. I mean, I never saw Stanley sober. Except one time. He had we call them doodle bugs. You take a car, strip it down, take everything off of it. You just have a skeleton of a car, and you have the motor there, and you load the back with a lot of heavy stuff, so you can go up and down the hollers and the hills and all that kind of stuff. We call them doodle bugs. I don't know what you'd call them today, but anyway, Stanley had one, but he in the floorboard. I don't know if I'll tell you all this or not. Kind of gruesome. On the floorboard, he didn't have it solid, and he was riding along there, and he had a pair of brand new Levi's on, because I remember it. It could have been another brand. And he put one foot underneath the other to kind of just relax. Well, the U-joint was right there. And it took his britches leg, and it took his leg. And when in the hospital, he was sober. But in my other encounters with him, even though I was a kid, I could tell that he was drunk. But Claudia would do a lot to deflect away from the behavior of her own children to the behavior of other people's children. And what she was doing is she was rationalizing that this is that bad. And, you know, just do that what you will. But what I'm saying by that is you and I can do that. We're very good at it. That's why your sin is worse than mine, if I'm the one saying it. And you do the same thing. We can condemn someone for doing the very same thing that we've done. And we can condemn them. We can judge them, but we try to spare ourselves. Okay, I know time's about to get away. Verse 11. But besides this, you know the time that the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. And that's for us too. For us too. The night is far gone, the day is at hand, so let us cast off the works or the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies or drunkenness or sexual immorality or sensuality or quarreling or jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Be like Him, in other words. Seek to be like Him. Put off this other stuff, and he uses that kind of phraseology as if you put Him on. And then and here is the key. You want the key? This will be worth for your price of admission tonight, I promise you. Right here it is. Make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. I had a fellow that I got to know quite well, again in southeast Arkansas. And he was an alcoholic. He lost his job, he lost his family, he lost everything. But a little red pickup that he drove, a little Ford Ranger, I think it was. I sat on the tailgate with that thing with him when he was having the DTs. You ever see anybody have the DTs? It was awful. I mean, it wasn't just the shaking and the sweating. He was hurting. And the DTs and whatnot. But this was back when you could go into grocery stores and there was no liquor there. You know, you could even go to Walmart stores. Sam Walton was still alive, so there was no liquor in the Walmart stores. Anyway, I had him, and our deal was, if he was ever somewhere where there was liquor, he was supposed to call me. And I even told him, don't go into a restaurant that has liquor. Don't go into a store that has liquor. You stay out of those places. And what I was trying to do, I didn't use this verse. I may have used it, I don't remember. But the point is, don't. If that's where your weakness is, don't go there. In other words, don't make provision for the flesh. That's just a graphic example. But I can do all kinds of stuff like that. Can I give you one more example in 1 minute? I'll tell you about a gal. I will not say her name, but she's not from here. Anyway, so you wouldn't know her. But she was involved in the church that I was pastoring at the time. It was not this one, it was a different one. And she came to me one day in tears because everybody would tell her everything they were unhappy with in church. Everything. She said, I just don't know why everybody will do it. I mean, I'm not making fun of her. She just cried, why does people do all that? Well, you know why they did all that? Because her name was Beth. Because Beth accepted it. One of the best examples to explain what Beth was doing is this one. I want you to think about a man that has a manicured lawn. Okay? I mean, he spends hours on it every week. The lawn has been weeded and everything, it just perfect. He mows it twice a week. He spends all the time on it. Now, if somebody drives by, pulls up and stops, and takes a bag of trash and tosses it down on his lawn, what's he going to do? He's going to freak. He's going to be very upset. Now, contrast that man to a man that has a lawn, but he's got trash all over it. It's all over the lawn. I mean, he's got car bodies over here. He's got piles of trash here. It's overgrown and weeds everywhere. And somebody drives by and has a trash bag and tosses it out there. Is he going to be upset? Not as much. What was Beth doing? She was saying, come and dump your trash here. She was making a provision for the flesh. I want to hear the gossip. I want to hear your discontent. I got the welcome mat out. Please bring it to me, and I'll take it. What she should have done is when somebody came with a complaint, she should have said, have you talked to that person? No. Go talk to that person. I'm not the right person to talk to about this. They are. And walk away. That's the difference, you see. Make sense to you? Thank you so much. Next time we go to chapter 14.